Hello, I am Shivaji Bhaskar, Faculty of Russian at the School of Foreign Languages, IGNOU. I welcome you all to this course, Basics of Russian Communication Skills, Part 1. In this module, we will be discussing about various aspects of the dative case. As you remember, in the previous module, we have discussed about the nouns of masculine, feminine and neuter gender in singular in dative case. As we know that the forms of adjectives and pronouns which indicates indirect object, which means that in dative case such forms of adjectives and pronouns which are being used to express meaning in a particular sentence in dative case, these adjectives and pronouns also take shapes as per the rules of the grammar of the dative case. To understand it clearly, let us pay attention to some of the aspects of the grammar. In Russian language, we use forms of adjectives and pronouns which indicate indirect objects. Whenever we are talking about indirect objects in the Russian grammar, it actually denotes the case which is known as dative or the dachilny padyesh. These indirect objects play an important role in the completion of a sentence. The sentences which have indirect objects like by whom and to whom are being completed by such forms of adjectives and pronouns. So, the basic questions in the dachilny padyesh are kamu, chimu, kakamu, kachimu, and as a rule we know that in any sentences, in order to identify the case, we have to rely upon the usage of the verbs. So, accordingly, as we are talking about the adjectives and pronouns, we will be taking a few cases where we will see the usage of the verbs and their conjugation. In order to understand these different verbs which are being used in dachilny padyesh or dative case, let us pay attention to the list of such verbs first. The verbs are classified in the groups which are largely used to indicate their usage in the dative. We would like to recommend you all to conjugate them and memorize. So, the verbs are padkhajich, padaichi, davach, dach, darich, padarich, объяснять, объяснить, показывать, показать, рассказывать, рассказать, говорить, сказать, звонить, позвонить, помогать, помочь, сообщать, сообщить, and привыкать and привыкнуть. So, all these verbs are in a different set so that we know their groups. Padkhajich, padaichi, they belong to the same group. Davach, dach, darich, padarich. Largely, such groups of verbs are known as perfective and imperfective in order to explain that whether they complete an action or not. So, according to the usage of these verbs, we shall go ahead and pay attention to a few more conjugations. So, we shall take the first example of the verb which is used in dative, padkhajich and padaichi. Please pay attention to the verb conjugation so that whenever you use them in any sentence in a conjugated form, they express the right meaning. Я подхожу, ты подходишь, он, она подходит, мы подходим, вы подходите, они подходят. The second one is padaichi. It is similar as we have learned in the verbs of motion, ichi and khajij. Ichi means to go on foot on a single direction, and khajij means also to go on foot in multiple directions. So, like this we are using the same set of verbs with the help of prefix pad, which signifies and indicates the usage in dative case. Now we will conjugate the verb padaichi. Ya padaidu, ti padaijosh, on ana padaijot, mui padaijom, vi padaijyoche, ani paidut. So largely the conjugation remains same, however the prefix is attached to both the verbs. The past tense we already know. For masculine, feminine and plural, they are changed with the usage of the introduction of la at the end for masculine, la and a for feminine, and la e for plural. Let us see how. The past tense for padaichi and padkhajij would be ya tuion, padkhajil, padshol, padkhajila, padashla and padkhajilin, padashli. So simple, in a very easy manner you can also conjugate them in past tense. Now we will go ahead and pay attention to the next set of verbs. So the verbs are dawaj and daj. So the verbs are dawaj and daj. Please pay attention to the conjugation of these two verbs while I will conjugate for you. Please pay attention to these verbs while I conjugate these verbs for you. Dawaj and daj, to give. Dawaj and daj means to give. Ya dayu, ti dayosh, onana dayot, mi dayom, vi dayoche, ani dayut. Daj, ya dam, ti dash, onana dast, mi dajim, vi dadiche, ani dadut. And the simple difference between these two verbs is daj means to give and dawaj means to give, but the process is incomplete. Now let us go ahead and pay attention to the past form. Yati on dawal, yati on dal, yati on dawal, yati ana davala, yati ana dala, mui vui ani dawali, mui vui ani dali. So according to the rules of the grammar for past tense, you can change them easily. Now a next set of verbs, the verbs are darich and padarich. Darich, ya daryu, tui darish, on ana darit, mui darim, vi darich, ani darit. Padarich, ya padaryu, tui padarish, on ana padarit, mui padarim, vi padarich, ani padarit. So I hope the conjugation of all these verbs are clear to you. Now we will see that how they are changed into past tense. Yati on daril, yati on padaril, yati ana darila, yati ana padarila, mui vui ani darili, mui vui ani padarili. Now let us go ahead and pay attention to the next set of verbs, abisnach and abisnich. Abisnach, abisnich means to explain. Ya abisnyayu, ti abisnyayish, on ana abisnyayat, mui abisnyayam, vi abisniche, ani abisnyayut. Abisnich, ya abisnyu, ti abisnish, on ana abisnit, mui abisnim, vi abisniche, ani abisnyayat. So here there is the major difference between the conjugation of these two verbs, how they are conjugated. Now we shall take the past tense. Yati on abisnyal, yati on abisnil, yati ana abisniala, yati ana abisnila, mui vui ani abisnyali, mui vui ani abisnilia. So this is also the difference in the past form of these two verbs. Now let's go ahead and pay attention to the next set. In this set we have two verbs, pakazivach and pakazach. Pakazivach, ya pakazivayu, ti pakazivash, on ana pakazivayat, мы показываем, вы показываете, они показывают. Показать. Я покажу, ты покажешь, она покажет, мы покажем, вы покажите, они покажут. So according to the rules of the grammar, how both the verbs are changing, you can also pay attention to the ending of these verbs in past tense. Я ты он показывал, я ты он показал, я ты она показывала, я ты она показала, мы вы они показывали, мы вы они показали. So here you can see how they are changed into the past form. Now let's pay attention to the group of these two verbs, рассказывать and рассказать. Рассказывать, я рассказываю, ты рассказываешь, он она рассказывает, мы рассказываем, вы рассказываете, они рассказывают. Рассказать, я расскажу, ты расскажешь, он она расскажет, мы расскажем, вы расскажите, они расскажут. Рассказывать, рассказать means to narrate. So now let's pay attention to the past tense. Я ты он рассказывал, я ты он рассказал, я ты она рассказывала, я ты она рассказала, мы вы они рассказывали, мы вы они рассказали. So this is the way how do we conjugate them in past form. Now let's go ahead and pay attention to the next set of verbs, говорить and сказать. Говорить and сказать means to say. Говорить, я говорю, ты говоришь, он она говорит, мы говорим, вы говорите, они говорят. Сказать, я скажу, ты скажешь, он она скажет, мы скажем, вы скажите, они скажут. Now let's pay attention to their conjugation in past tense. Я ты он говорил, я ты он сказал, я ты она говорила, я ты она сказала, мы вы они говорили, мы вы они сказали. So I hope by doing these exercises it is very clear to you all that how do we conjugate these different verbs. But however, we have to understand the usage of these different verbs which largely belong to the same group and they convey the same message, but they are conjugated differently. Now the next set we have for the verbs zvanij pozvanij means to call. Let's pay attention to the verbs conjugation while I'll conjugate them for you. Zvanij, я звоню, ты звонишь, он она звонит, мы звоним, вы звоните, они звонят. Позвонить, я позвоню, ты позвонишь, он она позвонит, мы позвоним, вы позвоните, они позвонят. Now let's go ahead and pay attention to the conjugation in the past form. So the past tense form for звонить позвонить is я ты он звонил, я ты он позвонил, я ты она звонила, я ты она позвонила, мы вы они звонили, and мы вы они позвонили. Now largely since we are talking about the verbs which we are using in the dative case, we have a few more verbs with us such as помогать and помочь. Помогать, помочь means to help. Я помогаю, ты помогаешь, он она помогает, мы помогаем, вы помогаете, они помогают. Помочь. Я помогу, ты поможешь, он она поможет, мы поможем, вы поможете, они помогут. So here you can see some of the verbs endings, some of the conjugation of the verbs are different than the verbs which we have learned so far. Now the only thing how you can use them properly is to memorize them. So as many as times you memorize, so it depends upon how many times you practice them, or note them down in your notebook and practice them with your family and friends in order to understand them fully. Now pay attention to the past tense form of pamagac and pamoch. Ya ti on pamagal, ya ti on pamok, ya ti ana pamagla, ya ti ana pamagla, ya ti ana pamagala, ya ti ana pamagla, мы, вы, они помогали, мы, вы, они помогли. So here how we change these verbs conjugations in the present form as well as in the past form. So the next set of verbs we have is subshach, subshich. Subshach, subshich means to inform. Я сообщаю, ты сообщаешь, он, она сообщает, мы сообщаем, вы сообщите, вы сообщаете, они сообщают. Сообщить. Я сообщу, ты сообщишь, он, она сообщит, мы сообщим, вы сообщите, они сообщат. Okay, now let's pay attention to the past tense form. The past tense form for subshach, subshich would be я, ты, он сообщал, я, ты, он сообщил, я, ты, она сообщала, я, ты, она сообщила, мы, вы, они сообщали, мы, вы, они сообщили. Now let's go ahead and pay attention to a few more verb conjugations. Привыкать, привыкнуть. Привыкать, привыкнуть means to accustom to. Я привыкаю, ты привыкаешь, он, она привыкает, мы привыкаем, вы привыкаете, они привыкают. Привыкнуть. Я привыкну, ты привыкнешь, он, она привыкнет, мы привыкнем, вы привыкнете, они привыкнут. So according to this, we have seen how do we conjugate these two different verbs, but they belong to the same group. Past tense. Я, ты, он привыкал, я, ты, он привык, я, ты, она привыкла, я, ты, она привыкла, я, ты, она привыкала, я, ты, она привыкла, мы, вы, они привыкали, мы, вы, они привыкли. Now let's go ahead. So now let's pay attention to the adjectives which qualify in the masculine singular nouns while answering the question kamu and chimu. With the help of certain verb conjugations of the dative case, we have already seen how they are being used in the sentences, but to enrich any sentence or convey the exact meaning of the expression, we require adjectives as well. So usually in this case the interrogative word is kakamu. To understand the question kakamu in the dative case, let's pay attention to a few sentences. Читатели подарили известному писателю ручку. So here the question as per the dative case would be какому писателю читатели подарили ручку. So какому is for известному. Какому писателю читатели подарили ручку? Читатели подарили известному писателю ручку. So известный писатель changes into известному писателю as per the rules of the grammar for dative case. Now let's pay attention to the next sentence. Вчера он ходил к старшему брату. К какому брату он ходил вчера? So here if you pay attention, we have used the expression к какому. К какому брату он ходил вчера? К старшему брату он ходил вчера. Now the next one is туристы шли к большому театру. К какому театру шли туристы? К большому театру. So with the help of ka and kakamu, we have understood the usage and the meaning of sentences while using the question kakamu for masculine gender adjectives along with the nouns. To understand the adjectives ending in u ikrat or o ikrat, let's pay attention to some of the expressions, how the endings are changing into omu. So, the set of adjectives and nouns are красивый артист, известный писатель, современный город, новый дом and большой театр. All of them are having adjective and noun agreeing. The adjective endings and the noun endings are same. That is why in case of dative they are also changing similarly. How? So, красивый артист changes into красивому артисту. Кому он подарил новую ручку? Он подарил новую ручку красивому артисту. Красивому артисту он подарил новую ручку. So, these different kind of sentences signifying, denoting the same meaning in a sentence basically revolves around the set of rules of the dative case only. Likewise, известный писатель changes into известному писателю, современный город changes into современному городу, новый дом changes into новому дому, большой театр changes into большому театру. Now, let's go ahead and pay attention to a few more such adjectives which ends with ee kratki. So, any adjective which ends with ee kratki changes into ему. Like старший брат, старшему брату, последний студент, последнему студенту, хороший город, хорошему городу. But we have to understand if any adjective which ends with ee kratki is preceded by g, k and kh, the adjective ends in omu while answering the question kamu чему. Like строгий человек, строгому человеку, маленький город, маленькому городу and тихий океан, тихому океану. So, I hope the concept of changing the adjective endings and the noun endings is clear to you as far as the masculine singular nouns are concerned. Now, we will go ahead and pay attention to the adjectives qualifying singular neuter nouns answering the question чему. Usually, in this case, the interrogative word is какому. Мы шли к маленькому зданию. К какому зданию мы шли? К маленькому зданию. So, we have understood the usage of neuter, gender, singular nouns along with the adjectives changing as per the requirement of the question чему. Now, let's go ahead and pay attention to a few more expressions. The neuter singular adjectives and nouns ending in oa of an adjective is replaced by omu, like новое окно, новому окну. So, the ending of the noun if окно changes into окну, the adjective ending which has oa changes into новому окну. Likewise, большое общежитие changes into большому общежитию. Молодое государство changes into молодому государству. And маленькое здание changes into маленькому зданию. Now, let's go ahead and pay attention to a few adjectives which ends in ye now changes into ему. How? Let's see. Хорошее кресло, хорошему креслу. Соседнее здание, соседному зданию. So, I hope all these adjective endings along with the noun endings are clear to you under the rules for the dative case. Now, to understand them easily, let's pay attention to a few activities. Now, let's pay attention to the model. Она объяснила новый студенту упражнения. So, in the bracket we have the word, the adjective новый. Она объяснила новому студенту упражнения. Она объяснила новому студенту упражнения. Она, she, объяснила, explained, новому студенту, new student, упражнения, exercises. Сейчас мой брат идет к, in bracket we have школьный товарищу. Сейчас мой брат идет к, школьный changes into школьному and товарищу remains товарищу. Сейчас мой брат идет к школьному товарищу. Поезд шел к маленькому городу. So, маленький changes into маленькому городу. So, likewise, you can also change rest of the exercise as per the rules of the grammar we have learned in the dative case. Now let's pay attention to the exercises. Maya sistra sigda pamagait malatsi bratu. So malatsi changes into malatshamu bratu. Včera Anton pozvanil bliski drugu, bliskamu drugu. Eči učeniki idут к старому учителю. Туристы долго шли к морскому берегу. Она подошла к высокому зданию. Like this, you can also solve the exercises easily while following the rules for the dative case as far as adjective and noun endings are concerned. Now, let's pay attention to the adjectives qualifying feminine singular nouns. Answering the questions kamu and chimu. Kamu for the animate and chimu for inanimate. Usually, in this case, the interrogative word is какой. Преподаватель дал новый студентке учебник. Какой студентке преподаватель дал учебник? So, here in case of feminine singular adjectives, we have replaced it with какой. Его сестра идет к соседней бабушке. Его сестра идет к соседней девушке. В какой девушке? К какой дедушке? К какой девушке идет его сестра? К соседней девушке. Рабочие шли к большой фабрике. К какой фабрике шли? К какой фабрике шли рабочие? So here you can see the rule of the grammar that for indicating feminine gender adjectives we have used the expression какой. Now let's go ahead and pay attention to the adjectives ending in aya becoming o и краткий while answering the question кому чему. Новая студентка новой студентке. Молодая женщина молодой женщине. Строгая преподавательница строгой преподавательнице. Тихая соседка тихой соседке. Большая фабрика большой фабрике. Любимая страна любимой стране. And маленькая улица маленькой улице. Now let's go ahead and pay attention to a few more adjectives which ends in яя changes into ye и краткий. Соседняя деревня changes into соседней деревни. Сегодняшняя газета changes into сегодняшней газете. Последняя выставка changes into последней выставке. Now let's pay attention to the activity in order to understand the rules of the grammar for feminine singular adjectives endings and noun endings. Let's pay attention to the model. Она сообщила старая женщине о новом фильме. So старая changes into старый. Она сообщила старой женщине о новом фильме. She informed old woman about new film. Учительница подошла к черной доске. So черная changes into черный. The female teacher подошла went to the blackboard. So according to the rules of the grammar which you have learned in this section, you can very easily solve the exercise. Now let's go ahead and pay attention to a few more exercises. Девушка подарили, in bracket you have любимая учительнице красивую сумку. Девушки подарили любимой учительнице красивую сумку. Сита подошла к центральной библиотеке и ждала друга около входа. So according to the rules of the grammar which you have learned, you can solve the exercises easily. So here in this module we have discussed about the adjective endings for the masculine, feminine and neuter, as well as we have seen the agreement between the adjective endings and the noun endings while answering the question kamu and chimu. More significantly, in this module we have discussed about the verb conjugations which are basically used in the dative case. In order to use it properly, we would like to recommend you all to learn and memorize all these conjugations by heart and start using these conjugated forms of verbs in your sentences and expressions. With the help of all these exercises which we have done in this module, you will be able to express clearly with the help of expressions and sentences in dative. I hope you all enjoyed the module which is related to the dative. In our upcoming modules, we will be taking a few more such cases. Thank you.